It's going to be seriously a test of my endurance. I've been talking solidly for about 4 hours now, and I thought, wow, let's get this, get this done and dusted. The last lecture for the year, but believe me, I'm exhausted. I'm sure you guys are as well with Monday, the exam. So I can relate to how you feel. I hope you're all well prepared. I suspect a lot of the flex students in particular are not doing full-time loads, or at least I hope not, on top of work. But if you have, I really sincerely wish you all the best, and you have my sympathy. It is an afternoon exam, so don't forget not to have too big a meal beforehand. Have an adequate meal, but a balanced, not too heavy meal, so you don't get sleepy during the exam. And watch the coffee and the sleep the night before. Make sure you get a good sleep. It's key to performing well. All right, let's get into the final topic of the year or of the semester, organisational change. This is a big issue. Resistance to change has been identified by a fair swath of managers as being an important barrier to productivity in the workplace. 43% of American managers, and 21% of those people who are charged with changing things within an organisation, what we call change agents. 21% of those in a 40-country survey, so a nice big international survey, said that employees still resisted change 1 or 2 years after it was implemented. And you can ask yourself, why is resistance to change such a big deal? I'll just introduce one of the key theoretical backgrounds to this field, Lewin's force field analysis. And Kurt Lewin is quite a big character in this field. He claims that stability is a result of an equilibrium between restraining forces to change and driving forces for change. And when they are in balance, there is no change. When the driving forces exceed the restraining forces, then change begins to happen until you get to this state of a new position where the company or the organisation or the team reaches, and then equilibrium again stops further change from occurring. Now he claims that there can be both subtle and obvious causes of restraint and change, driving and restraining forces. And he uses these two terms that you should familiarise yourself with, both freezing and unfreezing of the system or the organisation. So when a status quo is in place, a freezing process is considered to have occurred. You know, that there is a stability between the restraining and driving forces, and the process is frozen. But when you need to increase, when you need to facilitate change, you have to unfreeze that status quo. When you reach the point where you're happy with the situation, you have to try and refreeze the system. We'll talk briefly about all these processes and how to facilitate them. But why is change such a big deal? Why do people still, as that 40-country project found, why does such a large number of people still resist change even 2 years later? Now, resistance of change can include sort of active and passive resistance forms. Active includes things like work stoppages or sabotage or just grumbling, whereas passive resistance includes things like, sickies, absenteeism, go-slows, or, doing work without being engaged. Human change is hard because of things like habit, or because of work-life balance issues, so structural issues within your life. The important reason that we resist change is because of ego. We're invested in who we are. If we've always put the toilet roll that way, simply changing it means being subtly told you were wrong, the way you did it was wrong, and that takes a toll on one's ego. Culture is also a big reason, and culture, we can talk about organisational culture or culture in a more normal sense of the word, as being a structure of ways, of values and practices of doing things, as we talked about last week. And those values and structures can impede change, because when we make a change in one element of a structure, it has ricochet or domino impacts on other elements of the structure. There can also be, educational reasons for resistance of change and personality reasons of resistance of change. You might remember from the Big Five: openness to experience is one of the Big Five personality characteristics, and it's associated with willingness to change. So these resistances come from personality reasons, expectancy reasons, thinking that the change will fail and will cost them, or it will leave me being in a worse position than before, lacking skills to change. It's going to take a lot of energy to reskill for this. Lack of role clarity. What are the status implications? Will I become a less significant or less powerful person in the organization as a result of this change? And situational reasons. Even if I want to change, these machines are too old, kind of thing. Now, the most commonly cited reasons for resistance are direct costs, the cost-benefit analysis, and it goes back to the model, expectancy theory model that we talked about quite a number of weeks ago, the P to O expectancies, etc. Saving face, the ego issue, the fear of the unknown. Will their skills be as valued? Where will my status be in the future? Will I have to work with new colleagues? Will I have to move office? Routines. Incongruent team dynamics, that the team, for example, you can want to change something individually, but the team pressure is to keep doing it another way, and you'll find it very hard to resist that for reasons of conformity, for example, the human drive to conform. And incongruent organizational systems. So if there's a poor alignment between what the boss wants you to change and the way the organization is set up, then resistance to change will occur. It's not always a bad thing, of course, because a little bit like conflict within a system, this kind of resistance signals that there's something not quite right about how the organization's set up. It can be like a form of constructive conflict, helping to identify better ways for it to happen. And it's also this expression, employee voice, that I've talked about, and voice mechanisms. This is resistance is a form or a style of expressing voice. So it may lead to improvements in procedural justice, particularly if redirected into formal avenues. Righty. So when you want to create an urgency for change, you need to sort of tread that line between, creating a desperate stampede and be creating the kind of sufficient emotional energy to allow people to feel that we're going to need to change the way we do things around here, change the culture, for example. So, bring employees into contact with customers. Customers have certain needs, and people within the silos, to use a structural organizational structure term, within their little silos of their life, or of their organizational life, they may not realize that there is a need for change. But if you bring the two parties together, then that impetus can occur as a result of that. If things are going well, and you need to connect, just someone came into the room, so I'm a little bit unsure. You need to communicate that need for change, transformational leadership, charismatic leadership, that supply them with an argument that employees can connect to. So 6 strategies for reducing resistance. I just mentioned communication. You can also retrain and train people to have the skills to deal with the change that they're about to face. Involvement, get them involved with the decisions. They'll have a greater commitment to things that they're involved with changing. Deal with the stress side, just the affective, emotional side. So reduce the negative energy relating to change. We've talked about negotiation previously. And also, you can also, of course, force change through coercion. Now, all of these cost time and money, but they have to be outweighed against the cost of having things go on the same way, or the cost of resistance. The question you need to ask with this freezing and unfreezing that Lewin talks about is that, look, you can do all wonderful things through charisma and other types and bring them into contact with the customers, and they'll go back to their silos and things slowly fold back into shape, fold back into the old way of doing things. And you need to pin down or glue down or freeze those changes. And in order to do that, you can change physical and procedural structures that are hard to ignore, so that the employees or staff members that are involved with this resistance to change are kind of channeled into the new ways of behaving. You can do that through change reward systems, and you can also do it through feedback, steady praise and criticism, feedback. It often snaps back. So cross-cultural and ethical issues, not all cultures have the same attitude towards change and towards time even. Some tend to think in cyclical terms, and of course there's the collectivist cultures that think in terms of interconnected terms. Some cultures also strongly emphasize harmony and equilibrium, which is quite incompatible with our Western view of, let's go in there and let's shake things up a bit. The change is seen as an absolute negative under these kind of cultures. And not everyone wants to engage in the kinds of techniques that can be required for some of these change strategies. And we'll be talking about action research a little bit later. But the action research just briefly involves a need to, talk about the problems within the organisation in a critical manner. And that can include self-criticism or self-revelation, or it can include telling other people, hey, this is causing me a trouble. And that can be ego-threatening. It can damage people's self-esteem. So 3 other ingredients for change. Change agents. Change agents generally use transformational leadership, but it can be not just bosses that use it, but others at different levels of the organisation can employ that. And they need to have, like transformational leadership, they have to have that driving vision, that good leadership skills, and that good communication skills. Remember those stages we talked about in the that lecture a few weeks back before Christmas, I believe. And then there's the issue of coalitions, where you build allies within an organisation to help spread the change through the organisation. Viral change is what the textbook refers to. And it relies on that social power, referent power is what social power, that connection between different individuals. It relies on social ties, which we talked about, strong ones, and also relies to some degree on modelling the correct behaviour as a form of forming these coalitions. Pilot projects is where you actually excuse me. Pilot projects, there's no water left. Pilot projects is where you take a part of the company and you set up an example of how that change should occur, and allows managers to demonstrate success to the broader organisation. I won't go through this because I don't think this is very useful. Now there's 4 approaches to organisational change for change agents and consultants, which I'll want to talk about here. And the action research, which I just referred to just briefly before, it's again associated with this Kurt Lewin guy who provided that initial model that we talked about, the force field model. It involves a kind of scientific approach to change, where employees become like researchers and work with the change agent. So it involves making a change, checking how it worked, analysing the results, repeating it in a different setting, kind of good scientific principles to try to, within a working, living organisation, not inside a laboratory. So it's actually got something quite different from ordinary research, where you control all the variables as much as possible. Here, the variable is breathing, and it's got this open systems perspective, which means that, it's a recognition of reality, that if you change one thing, it changes all those things around it, or if the things around it are changing, the systems are open to change as a result of change around them. It's a very influential view within this field, and rightly so. Action research process, this is straight out of the textbook. If you're using a consultant, you use these two ends of the model. If you're not, you can ditch them. But effectively, it involves that initial diagnosis of the need for change, the introduction of the intervention, and then the evaluation process where you look if the change is adequate, if it's functional, and then you try and refreeze those conditions at that last stage. Appreciative inquiry approach is a little bit more waffly. It takes a constructive approach to reality. Conversations shape reality. Constructivism is not something I've got a huge amount of sympathy for, and I suspect within a business degree you won't get too much of it. But constructivism is that we all help shape reality with the way we think about it and the way we talk about it. A simultaneity principle, inquiry and change occur together, which is very much an action research kind of focus as well. Perception is subjective, that's the poetic principle. An anticipatory principle, which basically means that it's like expectancy theory. People are motivated by visions of the future that they either want or don't want. The 4D model of appreciative inquiries is a process of discovery and dreaming, designing and delivering. It's just very briefly, we're doing okay in terms of time. So in the discovery stage, you identify the best practices within the organisation through interviewing and discussions. Dream, you imagine alternative outcomes for brainstorming or through brainstorming. Designing, you put those thoughts onto paper, for example, in a positive dialogue sense, and respond positively to suggestions and thoughts and options. And the delivery stage, quite obvious really. It has a checkered history. It has some good successes in the research, but practice often slips into negative blame game. People are often not very happy with the lack of structure from this kind of change process. And there's poor understanding of contingencies, the buts. This works, but for blah blah. Appreciative inquiry is one of a number of approaches that involve this kind of large group intervention approach. I'll zoom in there. These approaches include, future search, or like search conferences or open space technology. Now, these things are where, let's say an organisation plans some major change and you'll have a retreat to talk about it. We'll all go to Hamilton Island and have a big discussion, powwow about it all, where everybody kind of participates. It's often in a fairly unstructured environment, but it does minimise resistance by making everyone feel they're engaged and involved. But of course, the reality is that everybody's engaged and involved to a less degree because there is a large amount of people involved. And you get this threat of that a vocal minority can get in, and you can get these risky shifts. You remember groupthink and group shift, where a small minority that are particularly vocal can shift the result of a discussion or a decision making from a bland sort of middle road into a much more risky direction than what the average person thinks, or to a more conservative direction. And also these powwows tend to create a kind of excitement that and enthusiasm, which from the group characteristics, particularly if they're led by transformational leaders, that can be hard to match when you go home and try and implement it. And finally, this parallel learning structures. We talked about the pilot project here, where you take a part of the company and make a change there as a kind of example to the rest of the company. Parallel learning structures is where you create a mini little company outside the company. People from multiple levels of the organisation participate in and create a quasi-organisation that's parallel to the mothership, as I say there, and enables you to demonstrate that a certain kind of change works. I won't give you this example from Shell, but that is quite a brief final lecture. And I do wish you all the best next Monday. If you're having time to actually listen to this video before the exam, which I kind of doubt. It's been a pleasure working with all of you. And we've got some interesting times ahead in terms of marking the exams for me and then moderating the whole process. So the marks that you have received so far are not necessarily your very final ones. Phone coming through. Talk to you soon.